Imagine a wedding. Not just any wedding, but the most opulent ceremony the world has ever seen. The air in the grand hall of Alexandria is thick with the scent of lotus blossoms, frankincense, and roasting meats. Thousands of candles flicker their light dancing off walls covered in hieroglyphs that tell stories of gods and mortals. Gold glitters everywhere on the collars of the priests, the goblets of the guests, the very threads of the tapestries. At the center of it all, seated on a throne of ivory and ebony, are the bride and groom. They are living gods, rulers of the richest kingdom on earth. He is the king, the pharaoh. She is his queen. He is her brother. She is his sister. This isn't a twisted fantasy. This was the terrifying, calculated reality of the Ptolemaic Dynasty, the Greek rulers who declared themselves the new pharaohs of Egypt. For 300 years, as the Roman Republic rose and fell as civilizations clashed and empires were forged, the Ptolemies clung to a tradition that felt both divinely inspired and profoundly unnatural. They looked at the world outside their gilded palace walls, a world of shifting alliances and brutal betrayals, and they made a choice. They chose to turn inward. They chose to trust only their own. They chose to purify their sacred bloodline by mingling it with itself over and over and over again. What do you picture when you hear the word incest? Do you see decay, madness, a violation of nature's most sacred law? The Ptolemies saw something else entirely. They saw divinity. They saw power. They saw a direct line to the gods they so desperately wanted to emulate. They called themselves Theoi Philadelphoi, the sibling-loving gods. It was not a secret to be hidden in shame, but a title to be proclaimed from the rooftops, a cornerstone of their divine right to rule. But what happens when you try to build an empire on a biological paradox? What is the true cost of playing God with your own blood? The story of the Ptolemies is not just a tale of political ambition. It is a slow, creeping horror story written in the language of genetics. It's a story of how the quest for divine purity led to physical sickness, mental instability, and ultimately to a bloody, tragic implosion that brought an entire civilization to its knees. This is the story of a family that loved itself to death. Forget the glorious, sanitized version of Cleopatra you think you know. The truth is far darker, far more complex, and written in the twisted double helix of a family tree that grew so entwined it choked itself. So the central question, the one that hangs over this dynasty like a desert vulture, is why? Why would a lineage of brilliant strategists, ruthless politicians, and patrons of the greatest library in the ancient world embrace a practice that most cultures, including their own native Greek culture, considered a profound taboo? The answer is not simple ignorance. The Ptolemies were not fools. They were the heirs of Alexander the Great's most trusted general. They were masters of propaganda, economics, and warfare. The decision to marry brother to sister, uncle to niece, was a deliberate, ice-cold calculation of power, divinity, and survival. It was a solution to a series of very specific problems, but a solution that would over centuries become a far greater problem than any it was meant to solve. First, we must understand the world they inherited. When Ptolemy I Soter, the founder of the dynasty, seized control of Egypt in the chaotic aftermath of Alexander's death, he faced a monumental challenge. He was a Macedonian Greek, a foreigner ruling a civilization thousands of years old, a land steeped in traditions he did not share. How do you legitimize your rule over a people who have worshipped their kings as gods for millennia? You don't just become a king, you must become a pharaoh. And to become a pharaoh, you must act like one. Ptolemy and his successors observed the ancient Egyptian myths, the stories of the gods themselves. The divine Osiris married his sister Isis to create the perfect godly couple who brought civilization to Egypt. This was not just a story, it was a divine precedent. By mirroring the actions of the gods, the Ptolemies were not committing a taboo, they were performing a sacred rite. They were elevating themselves from mere mortal kings to living deities on earth, forging a link between their Greek heritage and Egypt's divine past. It was the ultimate act of political theater. Second, there was the problem of wealth and power. The Ptolemaic kingdom was staggeringly rich, the breadbasket of the Mediterranean. Its wealth was a constant lure for ambitious outsiders. Royal princesses in the ancient world were political commodities married off to foreign kings to forge alliances. But for the Ptolemies, this posed a unique risk. Marrying a Ptolemaic princess to a Seleucid king or a Roman general meant giving that outsider a potential claim to the Egyptian throne and its immense treasury. It was a leak in the ship of state they could not afford. The solution: keep the wealth, the power, and the bloodline contained within the family. A sister queen would have no foreign loyalties. Her children would be purely Ptolemaic. It was a closed system designed to be impenetrable, to preserve their power against a hostile world. It transformed the royal family into a self-contained vault, hoarding its legitimacy and its gold. And third, there was the illusion of purity. The Ptolemies, like many royal houses, were obsessed with the concept of blood. Theirs was not just noble blood. It was the blood of Alexander's companions, the blood of conquerors. In their minds, to mix it with the blood of lesser nobles or foreign powers was to dilute it, to weaken its potency. Inbreeding was seen not as contamination, but as concentration. They believed they were distilling their bloodline down to its purest, most divine essence. They were attempting to create a lineage so perfect, so separate from the corrupting influence of the outside world, that their right to rule would be absolute and unquestionable. So the paradox is this: the very act that was meant to preserve their dynasty, to make it stable, divine, and eternal, became the source of its deepest instability, its most human frailty, and its ultimate doom. They sought to emulate the gods, but in doing so they ran headfirst into the unforgiving laws of mortal biology. They built a fortress around their family, only to find they had created a prison, a genetic echo chamber where every flaw, every weakness, every bad trait was amplified and repeated, generation after generation, until the divine blood they so cherished had turned to poison. The stage was set for a tragedy of truly epic proportions, a 300-year-long family drama where the fatal flaw was not hubris, but genetics itself. Our story begins not with madness, but with a masterstroke of political genius. Ptolemy II, son of the dynasty's founder, ascended the throne in 284 BC. He was intelligent, cultured, and ambitious. He inherited a kingdom, but he wanted to forge an empire that would rival his father's hero, Alexander. Early in his reign, he was married to a princess from Thrace, Arsinoe I. But a different Arsinoe, his full-blooded sister, Arsinoe II, would change the course of the dynasty forever. She was a force of nature, brilliant, ruthless, and experienced, having already been queen of 2 other Hellenistic kingdoms through marriage. After a series of political intrigues that saw her rivals, including Ptolemy II's first wife, exiled Arsinoe II, return to Egypt. And there, in an act that shocked the Greek world, Ptolemy II married her. The Greeks in Alexandria were scandalized. This was not their custom. But Ptolemy and Arsinoe were playing a different game. They didn't hide it. They celebrated it. They adopted the epithet Philadelphoi, sibling lovers. They appeared together on coins, a united front of male and female power. They drew direct parallels to Zeus and Hera, and more importantly, to Osiris and Isis. They were telling their Egyptian subjects, "We are not just your Greek overlords. We are your new divine family." And it worked. Arsinoe II became a co-ruler in all but name, a powerful and stabilizing force who helped guide the kingdom to the zenith of its power and wealth. Their union, so unnatural to outsiders, created a period of unparalleled stability and prosperity. They had laid the foundation, sanctifying the practice. They had proven that incest could be a tool of power. But they had also opened Pandora's box, and for their descendants, the consequences would be dire. They themselves had no children together, a small mercy perhaps sparing the next generation the direct genetic cost of their union. That cost would be paid by their nephews and nieces. Let's leap forward a generation. Ptolemy IV. Philopator, which ironically means father-lover, a title he took in honor of his parents, who were also brother and sister. He married his own full sister, Arsinoe III, and here the gilded facade begins to crack. While his reign saw military victory, ancient sources like the historian Polybius paint a picture of a man given to luxury, decadence, and cruelty. He was controlled by corrupt courtiers, and his reign was marked by plots and paranoia. The first native Egyptian revolt in 2 centuries erupted under his rule, a sign of deep-seated problems in the kingdom. The personal tragedy of this union is even more stark. Despite their shared blood, there was no love or loyalty here. After Ptolemy IV's death, Arsinoe III became the regent for her young son, Ptolemy V. She held the power, but she was swiftly and brutally murdered by her late husband's ministers who feared her influence. The sister wife, the divine queen, was cut down in the shadows of the palace that was meant to be her sanctuary. The closed system was beginning to eat itself. The vault was no longer keeping outsiders out. It was trapping the family members inside with their deadliest enemies, each other. Imagine being born into this world. You are a prince, a living god. The air you breathe is perfumed with incense. The water you drink is cooled with snow from distant mountains. You are taught that your blood is the most sacred substance on earth. The woman you are told you must marry, the one who will share your throne and your bed, is the girl you grew up with, the one who shares your face, your blood, your name, your sister. What does that do to a human mind? What concept of love, of family, of the self, can possibly form in such a gilded cage? If you were that young Prince Ptolemy V coming to power as a child, after your mother was murdered by the court, and your father was a decadent failure, what choices would you make? Would you trust anyone, or would your world shrink to the confines of your own paranoia? Now let us descend further into the darkness, to the reign of Ptolemy VIII. Euergetes II, nicknamed Physcon or Potbelly for his extreme obesity. Physcon's life was a maelstrom of familial strife. The throne of Egypt became a bloody game of musical chairs between him, his brother Ptolemy VI, and their sister Cleopatra II. Physcon first married his sister Cleopatra II. They had a son, but his ambition and lust knew no bounds. He then seduced and married his own niece, who was also his wife's daughter, Cleopatra III, without divorcing his first wife. For a time, Alexandria was ruled by a bizarre and hateful triumvirate, a king, his sister wife, and his niece wife, who was also his stepdaughter. The city of Alexandria, the jewel of the Mediterranean, became their personal battlefield. Civil war erupted. At one point, Cleopatra II drove Physcon and her daughter out of the city. In a fit of unimaginable cruelty and rage, Physcon, who had fled to Cyprus, is said to have murdered his own son by Cleopatra II, the young boy Memphites, who was the heir to the throne. He then allegedly had the boy's body dismembered and sent the pieces back to Alexandria in a box to be delivered to the boy's mother, Cleopatra II, on her birthday. Stop and think about that. A father, a king, a supposed living god, butchering his own child to spite the boy's mother, who was also the king's own sister. This is not statecraft. This is not political calculation. This is the stuff of nightmares. This is the kind of profound psychological sickness that festers in the dark, airless rooms of a family that has lost all connection to the outside world. Is it possible that the centuries of inbreeding were beginning to manifest not just in physical ailments like his famed obesity, but in a deeper, more terrifying mental and emotional decay? The divine blood was now screaming. The instability wasn't just political anymore. It was pathological. The pursuit of purity had created monsters. This cycle of sibling rivalry, murder, and civil war continued weakening the dynasty generation by generation. The Ptolemies became puppets, their internal squabbles exploited by the rising power across the sea Rome. Rome would watch, wait, and mediate, extending its influence with every family feud, with every drop of royal blood spilled not by an enemy, but by a brother, a sister, a mother. This brings us to the final act. The last Ptolemaic ruler, the one whose name everyone knows, Cleopatra VII. Her story is so often framed as a romance, a clash of empires between Egypt and Rome. But look at her family tree, and you see it for what it truly is, the final gasping breath of a dying lineage. Her own parents were likely brother and sister, or at the very least, first cousins. The genetic deck was stacked against her before she was even born. She ascended the throne alongside her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy III. As was tradition, she married him. He was not her partner. He was her rival. A cabal of courtiers, seeing a pliable boy king, turned him against his brilliant and ambitious older sister. Civil war once again engulfed Egypt. It was only the arrival of Julius Caesar that tipped the scales in Cleopatra's favor. Her brother-husband, Ptolemy III, drowned in the Nile fleeing Caesar's legions. Power secured what was Cleopatra's next move. She was made to marry her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. She was a co-ruler in name only. It's said she had him poisoned to make way for her own son by Caesar Caesarion to be her co-ruler. Think of the sheer, terrifying loneliness of her position. She was arguably one of the most intelligent and capable rulers of her age, a polyglot, a skilled diplomat, and a naval commander. But she was trapped. Trapped by her family's traditions, trapped by the endless cycle of sibling rivalry, trapped by a court that saw her as a pawn, and trapped by the encroaching shadow of Rome. Her famous affairs with Caesar and Mark Antony were not just acts of passion. They were desperate gambles. They were attempts to inject new, powerful blood into her dying world, to create an alliance that could save her kingdom from the twin threats of Roman ambition and her own family's toxic legacy. When you look at the famous busts of the later Ptolemies, you can almost see the physical toll. The bulging eyes, which some historians speculate could be a sign of Graves's disease, an autoimmune disorder that can be hereditary. The pronounced obesity of figures like Physcon, the constant, unending strife. These were not the glorious, godlike rulers their ancestors had set out to be. They were sick, paranoid, and locked in a death spiral. So when Cleopatra chose suicide after the defeat of Antony's forces, was it just a final act of defiance against the victorious Octavian? Or was it also an escape? An escape from a family curse that had spanned 3 centuries. She was the most famous, the most brilliant, the last of her line. But she was also the ultimate product of the Ptolemaic experiment, a woman of immense talent whose life was defined and ultimately destroyed by the fatal flaw woven into her very DNA. The dynasty that began with a brother and sister seeking to become gods ended with a brother and sister tearing their kingdom apart, paving the way for a foreign power to swallow it whole. The sacred bloodline had finally and irrevocably failed. Now I ask you to place yourself in her sandals. You are Cleopatra. You have the mind of a genius, the ambition of an emperor, but you are born into this snake pit. The only men you are allowed to marry are your own adolescent brothers who are being manipulated to kill you. Your only hope for survival and for the preservation of your country is to look outside to forge alliances with powerful foreign men. Are your actions a betrayal of your family's code of purity? Or are they the only sane response to a code that has proven to be insane? What would you have done? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. For centuries, the story of the Ptolemies' downfall was told through the lens of morality and politics, a tale of decadence, hubris, and Roman power. But today, we can look back with a tool the Ptolemies could never have imagined: the cold, hard lens of modern genetics. Their story is a textbook case, a 300-year-long uncontrolled human experiment in the devastating effects of intensive inbreeding. The divine practice that was meant to purify their bloodline was, in scientific terms, systematically destroying it. To understand what happened, we need a brief journey into our own DNA. Every human being carries 2 copies of almost every gene, one inherited from each parent. Many genetic diseases known as autosomal recessive disorders only manifest if a person inherits 2 copies of the faulty or recessive gene. If you inherit only 1 copy, you become a carrier. You are likely perfectly healthy, but you hold a hidden genetic time bomb. In the general population, the chances of 2 unrelated people who are carriers for the same rare disease meeting and having a child are incredibly small. The genetic pool is vast and diverse, constantly shuffling the deck and ensuring that these faulty genes remain rare and hidden. Now consider what happens in a system of intense multi-generational inbreeding like the one the Ptolemies practiced. When a brother and sister have a child, they are not drawing from the vast ocean of human genetics. They are drawing from the same small, limited gene pool, that of their own parents. They both inherited their genes from the same 2 people. The probability that they both carry the same hidden recessive genes skyrockets. The chance of their child inheriting 2 copies of a faulty gene and thus suffering from the associated disease is no longer astronomically small. It becomes a terrifyingly high 1 in 4 for each recessive trait they both carry. This is not just about one generation. The Ptolemies practiced this for nearly 300 years. Grandchildren of siblings married their own siblings, who were also their first cousins. The family tree ceases to look like a tree at all. It collapses into a tangled, repeating loop. With each generation, the genetic diversity plummets. The deck is no longer being shuffled. It's as if they were playing with only a handful of cards over and over. Any faulty gene present in the founding members of the dynasty didn't get diluted or lost. Instead, it was concentrated, passed down, and had more and more opportunities to pair up and express itself. They were in essence creating a perfect storm for genetic disease. So, what were the likely consequences? While we cannot exhume and sequence the DNA of every Ptolemy, we can make educated guesses based on historical accounts and our modern understanding. First, let's consider physical health. There's a well-documented phenomenon called inbreeding depression, which leads to lower fertility, higher rates of infant mortality, reduced adult size, and a weakened immune system. The constant struggle for heirs and the many child rulers in the Ptolemaic Dynasty could well be a symptom of this. Queens struggled to produce healthy male children who would survive to adulthood. Furthermore, specific conditions are likely. The famous obesity of Ptolemy the Ephesus. Physcon, so pronounced that he required support to walk, could have been a manifestation of a hereditary metabolic disorder, perhaps something akin to Prader-Willi syndrome, or simply a genetic predisposition to morbid obesity, exacerbated by a lavish lifestyle. The distinctive protruding eyes or exophthalmos seen in many Ptolemaic coins and busts have led medical historians to speculate about a dynasty-wide affliction of Graves's disease or a similar thyroid condition. This is an autoimmune disorder where the body's immune system attacks itself, a system that we know can be compromised and dysregulated by a lack of genetic diversity. But perhaps the most devastating impact was not on the body, but on the mind. While it's impossible to diagnose historical figures from afar, the link between inbreeding and an increased risk of certain psychiatric conditions is an area of modern research. The erratic behavior, the extreme paranoia, the fits of uncontrollable rage like Physcon's butchering of his own son, and the endemic political instability could be more than just responses to a high-stakes political environment. They could be the symptoms of minds afflicted by genetic disorders. The very fabric of their personalities might have been frayed by the same process they thought was perfecting them. The constant civil wars and betrayals may not have just been driven by ambition, but by hormonally imbalanced, neurologically impaired individuals who lacked impulse control or a stable sense of reality. We can see a powerful parallel in another famous royal line, the House of Habsburg, who ruled Spain. Their centuries of uncle-niece and cousin-cousin marriages culminated in their final king, Charles II. He was a tragic figure suffering from a host of physical ailments, including the famous Habsburg jaw that made it difficult for him to eat or speak. He was also infertile, and his death without an heir plunged Europe into the War of the Spanish Succession. The Habsburgs, like the Ptolemies, had bred themselves into extinction. Their quest for political consolidation through marriage had led directly to their biological annihilation. The Ptolemies were essentially running the same experiment, but on an even more intense scale, starting from a much smaller founding population. They believed they were forging gods, but science tells us they were actually forging their own destruction. Every brother-sister marriage was another turn of the genetic ratchet tightening the screws on their own future. The ghost haunting the halls of the Alexandrian palace wasn't a spirit or a curse from the old pharaohs. It was the ghost of their own DNA, the specter of genetic decay rising from their sacred blood to claim its price. They had trapped themselves in a biological cage, and for 3 centuries the bars grew closer and closer together until there was no escape. The story of the Ptolemies is extreme, but it is not unique. It is a single harrowing chapter in a much larger book, humanity's long and often disastrous obsession with purity. Across cultures and throughout time, we see this same impulse, this same dangerous idea that closing ourselves off, that refusing to mix, will lead to strength. It rarely does. More often, it leads to weakness, to brittleness, and to collapse. Look at the Spanish Habsburgs, a dynasty so powerful they controlled half the world. Their motto was Ali bella gerant tu felix Austria nubes. Let others wage war, you happy Austria marry. They consolidated power not with armies, but with wedding rings, weaving a web of incestuous marriages across Europe. The result, King Charles II, the tragic end product, a man so genetically compromised, he was a king in name only. His impotence was not just personal, it was dynastic. The purity of the Habsburg bloodline led directly to its extinction on the Spanish throne. They guarded their blood so jealously that they were left with none to pass on. Look further back to the very pharaohs the Ptolemies sought to emulate. While sibling marriage wasn't as systematic as it became under the Greeks, it existed. The famous King Tutankhamun, the boy king, was a product of it. Genetic analysis of his mummy revealed he was the son of a brother-sister union, likely Akhenaten and one of his own sisters. And what was Tutankhamun's health like? He suffered from a clubfoot, a cleft palate, and likely Kohler's disease, a bone disorder. He was frail, required a cane to walk, and died young. The golden mask hides a story of genetic decline. The divine pharaoh was in reality a disabled young man, a victim of his family's quest for divine exclusivity. This pattern is not confined to royalty. Consider the concept of the pure blood ideology in aristocratic societies everywhere. The belief that noble blood is inherently superior, that mixing with commoners would be a contamination. This led to centuries of European nobles marrying within a tiny prescribed circle of cousins. While not as extreme as the Ptolemies, this practice still had consequences, concentrating hereditary diseases like hemophilia, which famously plagued the descendants of Queen Victoria and helped destabilize the Russian monarchy on the eve of revolution. This raises a profound philosophical question. What is the true nature of strength? Is it found in purity, in unchanging consistency, in a sealed and perfect system? Or is it found in diversity, in adaptation, in the messy, unpredictable, and vital process of mixing with the outside world? The Ptolemies bet everything on the first answer. They saw their kingdom as a perfect statue to be preserved unchanging under glass. Any crack, any foreign influence was a flaw. But life is not a statue. A healthy system, be it a gene pool, an ecosystem, or a society, is not a static object. It is a flowing river. Its strength comes from the constant introduction of new streams, new currents, new information. When you dam the river, when you cut it off from its sources, it doesn't remain pure. It stagnates. It becomes a fetid swamp where toxins concentrate and life withers. The Ptolemies didn't preserve their divine blood. They created a stagnant pond and were poisoned by the water. This is the ultimate paradox of purity. The obsessive pursuit of it almost always leads to the creation of its opposite. The quest for strength leads to weakness. The quest for divinity leads to sickness. The quest for order leads to chaotic collapse. It's a tragic irony that the very strategy designed to ensure the dynasty's immortality was the one that guaranteed its death sentence. They feared the outside world, the other, so much that they became their own executioners. And doesn't this echo in our own world, in our own lives? Think of any closed system you know. An isolated community that shuns all outsiders. An intellectual movement that refuses to engage with dissenting opinions. A political party that purges anyone who deviates from the official dogma. They all believe they are protecting a pure ideal. But what is the result? They become brittle extremists and unable to adapt to a changing world. They become echo chambers where their own flaws are amplified and their own assumptions go unchallenged, until, like the Ptolemies, they lose touch with reality and become architects of their own downfall. The Ptolemaic tragedy is a warning written in a grand and bloody scale. It cautions us that strength is not found in walls, but in bridges. Resilience is not born from exclusion, but from inclusion. And survival, whether of a gene or an idea, depends on the courage to engage with the world in all its messy, complicated, and diverse glory, rather than retreating into the deadly purity of the self. They chose the purity of the self, and the self, in the end, consumed them. It's easy to look back at the Ptolemies with a sense of detached horror, to see them as a bizarre relic of a brutal ancient world. It's easy to say, that was them. That was then. We are nothing like them. But are we so sure the biological mechanism of their downfall, incest, may be a taboo we have rightly relegated to the darkest corners of history? But the underlying impulse, the seductive and dangerous logic that drove them to it, is alive and well. It thrives in the heart of our modern, technologically advanced civilization. The Ptolemies created a genetic echo chamber. We have created digital ones. Think about how our modern world of information works. Social media algorithms, recommendation engines, personalized news feeds. They are all designed with a seemingly benign purpose to give us more of what we already like. If you click on a certain type of news article, it will show you more of the same. If you follow people with a certain political opinion, it will suggest you follow others just like them. If you express outrage at one thing, it will feed you a steady diet of things to be outraged about. The system is designed to create a comfortable, frictionless experience. It's designed to build a palace around you, where every voice you hear agrees with you, every piece of information validates your existing beliefs. It is in effect a system designed for ideological inbreeding. Just as the Ptolemies sought to concentrate their pure bloodline by excluding all foreign DNA, our digital echo chambers encourage us to concentrate our pure worldview by excluding all dissenting information. We are encouraged to unfollow, block, and mute voices that challenge us. We retreat into curated bubbles where our own biases are reflected back at us, amplified and distorted until they feel like objective truth. The other side ceases to be a group of people with different opinions. They become a monstrous alien caricature, just as the outside world must have seemed to the paranoid, isolated rulers in the Alexandrian palace. And what is the result of this informational inbreeding? It's a kind of societal inbreeding depression. Our ability to engage in civil discourse withers. Our collective immune system against misinformation and propaganda weakens. We see a rise in extremism as ideas that would be moderated or challenged in a diverse environment are allowed to fester and grow unchecked within the sealed walls of the echo chamber. We see the same paranoia that gripped the later Ptolemies, a constant fear of enemies and traitors, both outside and inside our own groups. We lose the ability to self-correct, because to self-correct, you must first be exposed to the idea that you might be wrong. The Ptolemaic rulers believed they were creating a dynasty of gods. Instead, they created a line of fragile, sick, and unstable individuals. In our echo chambers, we believe we are creating a more perfect, correct understanding of the world. But are we, or are we just creating more fragile, brittle, and unstable ideologies incapable of adapting to the complex reality that exists outside the bubble? An idea like a gene pool needs diversity to be strong. It needs to be challenged, tested, and forced to evolve. When it's only ever exposed to copies of itself, it becomes weak, dogmatic, and ultimately useless in navigating the real world. Furthermore, consider the Ptolemaic obsession with lineage and legacy in the context of our modern culture of branding and social media. They curated their divine image with statues and titles. We curate our personal and professional lives with Instagram posts, LinkedIn profiles, and carefully crafted online personas. There is immense pressure to present a pure brand, a flawless, successful, and perfectly consistent image. We airbrush our photos, we hide our failures, we present a highlight reel of our lives. We create a pure version of ourselves, and in doing so, we can become alienated from our real, messy, imperfect humanity. This pressure to maintain a facade of perfection, to never admit weakness or doubt, can lead to its own forms of psychological distress, anxiety, depression, and burnout. It is another form of the purity paradox. The quest for a perfect image can destroy the real person behind it. The story of the Ptolemies is a powerful metaphor for the dangers of any closed system. Whether it's a family locking its doors to outsiders, a nation building walls to keep foreigners out, or an individual curating their information feed to keep challenging ideas at bay, the result is the same. Isolation breeds weakness. Purity leads to stagnation. The refusal to mix, to engage, to adapt, is a slow form of suicide. The strength of the modern world, like the strength of the natural world, is its incredible, chaotic, and beautiful diversity. Our interconnectedness, our ability to share ideas, cultures, and yes, genes across the entire globe is our greatest asset. It is the ultimate antidote to the Ptolemaic curse. To deliberately turn our backs on that, to retreat into small, self-validating tribes, is to walk willingly back into the gilded cage that they found themselves trapped in. We have the collective knowledge of humanity at our fingertips, an unprecedented tool for fostering understanding and diversity of thought. Yet we so often use it to build the very walls the Ptolemies would have recognized, walls designed to protect a fragile sense of purity from a world perceived as threatening. We must recognize that the real threat doesn't come from the outside. It comes from the decay that sets in when the walls are too high. In the end, the story of the Ptolemies is a ghost story. But the ghost is not the spirit of Cleopatra lingering in her tomb. It is the ghost of potential. The potential of a brilliant dynasty that crushed itself under the weight of its own ideal. The potential of intelligent, capable rulers who were driven to madness and paranoia by a system they were powerless to change. It is the story of children born into a golden cage who never knew the sky was vast and open because they were taught that the only safe air to breathe was the recycled air of the cage itself. Their final chapter was written not by a Ptolemy, but by a Roman. Octavian, who would become the Emperor Augustus, dismantled their kingdom, executed Cleopatra's son Caesarion, and paraded her other children through the streets of Rome in chains. The line was extinguished. The 300-year experiment in divine purity was over. All that was left was a lesson etched into the walls of history: the fortress you build to protect yourself can become your tomb. This story forces us to look at our own walls, the ones we build in our minds, in our communities, and in our societies. The Ptolemies had a clear, stark reason for their choices: the preservation of divine power in a hostile world. Our reasons for creating our own echo chambers might seem less grandiose: comfort, validation, a sense of belonging, the avoidance of conflict. But the underlying mechanism is the same. It is the choice to narrow your world, to trust only the familiar, to see difference as a threat rather than an opportunity. The cage of the Ptolemies was forged from gold and tradition. Ours are forged from algorithms and ideologies. But a cage is still a cage. The tragedy of the Ptolemies is a timeless reminder that true strength, true resilience, and true progress are not found by looking inward, but by courageously looking outward. It is found in the messy, challenging, and ultimately enriching process of engaging with ideas, cultures, and people who are not like us. That is the path to a future that is robust and vibrant, not one that is fragile and doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. The question then that their story leaves for us is this: what walls have you built around yourself? And do you have the courage to tear them down? What do you believe was the true fatal flaw of this dynasty? Was it the biological certainty of genetic decay, the political ambition of Rome, or the profound human tragedy of a family that turned on itself? Share your analysis in the comments below. We read everyone, and if you find value in exploring these dark and complex corners of the human story, consider subscribing to Dark History and joining our community of curious minds. There are always more shadows to explore. Thank you for watching.